So thanks for being here today. ITAC is the IT Association of Canada. We have some 350 members from the very largest IT companies and telcos down to some of the very smallest firms. What we do is we advocate on behalf of this industry into governments on things like procurement and policy and how technology is changing the business landscape. And I tried to make a list of the top 10 technology disruptors, but I couldn't keep it to 10. So you have the not so top 10, top 12 technology disruptors. I'm going to run through these quickly, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to run through a bunch of questions around how technology and networking is really not only changing business, but it's changing people's lives. And it's really exciting because we're in a technology renaissance. If you look at the word renaissance in French is rebirth. And it's really, this is technology 2.0 time, and how we're going to develop 5G and leverage 5G to develop new applications. It's super exciting. Let me run through the top 12, and then we'll get into the panel. Number one, cloud computing. This is really changing the way we're doing business. We have taken the servers out of every business, and we have achieved economies of scale by allowing certain vendors to provide this service. This is changing the way we do business. Next up, the remote workforce. This is number two. Mobile technology and broadband proliferation allows people to connect with businesses, and businesses to connect and retain top talent almost anywhere in the world. Number three is the user experience. Now, this is the changing the way we're doing businesses. Consumers, like never before, have platforms to be able to pool their views and influence business outcomes. This is insanely exciting. The 5-star ratings you see on all the platforms, whether it's booking a hotel or a rental car company, businesses have to respond to consumers in a way that they never had to before. This is really interesting. Next up is the advent of the smart city. Our cities are developing applications to allow for greater enhancements in human mobility. I see the coolest applications in my job coming out of smart cities applications. There's one in Austin, Texas, where, not so dissimilar to what Jacob was talking about with those north glasses, they allow for blind people to have a digitally enabled walking stick that talks to them. And blind people can go, I want to go to Starbucks. And the walking stick will talk back to them. There's a Starbucks 50 yards ahead on your right. And it walks them literally into the store. And they can be having a conversation the whole way. In Boston, 60 intersections, the 60 highest collision intersections. The mayor challenged industry. He said, we want to lower the amount of collisions we're having in these intersections. So he put the data out there, companies crunched it, they resequenced the lights. They dropped collisions in these intersections by 80%. The mayor comes on, he goes, we're saving lives. We're changing society, leveraging technology. That's what the smart cities will be able to do. Next up, the Internet of Things. Like the glasses, like the walking stick. This is changing the way we interact with devices. Devices interact with other devices. Devices enable our interactions through consumers, society, businesses. Really interesting. We have some challenges on the Internet of Things side. The biggest one being security and privacy. And we want to have some conversation around that. Next up, this is going to change the way we live. Automated and connected vehicles. There's a reason why they're closing that GM plant in Oshawa. The automotive market space is being turned upside down. In future, people may not own cars. Or if you do, your car will work for you. It'll take you to work, it'll drop you off. The car will go out and run like an Uber all day. It won't need to park and sit there and do nothing all day. It'll pick you up and drive you home. So the car will literally pay for itself. It'll change the way we commute to back and forth to work. But it'll change human mobility. It'll change public transportation. Will we need a bus and an LRT if we have all of these automated vehicles? What happens if we have automated vehicles that have room for a dozen people and can just pick us up based on where we are with our smartphone? We don't have to order it up. It'll just pull up, we hop in, take us to work, let us out? Do we need to own a car? A lot of interesting questions on this front. Next up, smart machines and artificial intelligence. Now, this stuff's taken off in a big way. Everybody's excited about AI. The AI discussion started about 30 years ago. But now your smartphone, your car, your bank, your house, they're all using AI on a daily basis. Your credit card company's using AI to see if, well, that transaction looks a little off. The algorithm is triggering a response from the credit card company to tell you, is this you? Or is this somebody else trying to defraud you? AI is literally being embedded in everything. You can't just buy AI. We're building AI into every bit of technology. Number 8, quantum computing. Really interesting stuff going on here. We're taking traditional computer language and turning it on its head. The binary code 10010100 is now all being read simultaneously in quantum computing. This is going to change cybersecurity significantly, because the minute that we start getting massive quantum computers, traditional encryption becomes obsolete like that. So in Canada, we've made some investments in developing quantum-safe crypto. Really interesting stuff. There's a lot of work going down at Waterloo, the Institute for Quantum Computing. Really interesting developments in quantum coming our way. And this is a global race. The Chinese are investing a vast amount of money in quantum computing. And we went from years ago being able to have conversations around 1 qubit. Now we're talking about hundreds of qubits and really developing supercomputers. This is not a decade away. These are just years away from having supercomputers that can run quantum. Next up, I'm not sure about big anymore. It's vast. It's a sea of data. We're literally creating more data every year than we have in all of human history up until that point. The amount of data coming out of the Internet of Things and connected cars and all of this, and the need for 5G to transmit all of this data is coming at us. So it's not just big data, it's insane vast amounts of data and the analytics that we're going to have to run it. Number 10, 5G. 5G will be the backbone of all of these technologies. And the applications we're going to be building on 5G are going to enable all of this transformation to occur. This is transforming how the world works. And it's hitting China and Mexico in a big way, where robots are doing our manufacturing. So the disruption to the labor force, especially that lower end labor force, is being disrupted by robotics. And number 12 is the blockchain. And this is going to turn our financial industry on its head. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And we're going to talk about how network and technology is bringing together new opportunities for business. And I'll start right here. Go ahead, Jan.
Thank you. Good morning. Javan, Erfanian from Bell, Canada. It's a pleasure to be among you. I work in network technology strategy and strategic direction.
Good morning. My name's Jolliffe. I work at Wind River, located right here in Ottawa. Wind River had a big day yesterday. We were actually the operating system that was part of the Mars landing yesterday on Mars. So so it's great to be here. My role is more on the cloud technology side of Wind River, so it's great to see it #1 on Andre's list there. But really, I'm really passionate about driving compute to the edge of the network, how we can really connect devices together and create new opportunities. I'm also working a lot in open source. I work on a project called Starling X, and that may come up in some of my comments a bit later.
Morning all, it's Marc Paré. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for CloudOps. CloudOps is a Canadian-based org with a team in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. Our mission is to help people own their destiny in the clouds, hopefully soon in the solar system. We focus a lot on cloud-native technologies that are really helping accelerate the application delivery on top of the networks, as well as helping in the evolution of the networks.
Good morning, John Proctor. I'm the CEO of Martello, which is Ottawa's latest tech company to go public. We're an SD-WAN network performance management company based right here in Kanata with a huge number of partners in this ecosystem. Very pleased to be here.
Hi everybody, I'm Geoff Sullivan. I'm the head of marketing for Juniper Networks in Canada, Caribbean, and Latin America. Juniper Networks has traditionally been a switching, routing, and security company, but focusing on some of these technology trends that we just touched on, we're starting to focus a lot on software and a lot on the operations of these vast networks. So there's a lot of focus on automation and orchestration and analytics and things like that. So it's interesting to see how the networking world, even from a vendor perspective, is changing to embrace these new technologies.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, and welcome. We're going to get right into a series of questions we'll ask the panelists to respond to. Question 1, in what sectors are we seeing transformative technology as a direct result of connectivity?
I can go first. Sure. I guess some of the exciting use cases you touched on earlier, Andre, but one I'm particularly passionate about is when you look at how if you drive compute resources out to the edge of the network, you can transform things like locomotives, ships, in addition to automated vehicles, and really transform the way they operate, really bring AI capabilities to a locomotive, optimizing its travel throughout the rail network, which you wouldn't normally think about, but also overlay safety technologies on top of it. So really improving economic efficiency, but also the safety of the overall solution as well.
I think I don't think there's really a limitation on which verticals or which markets can take advantage of this. I think there's an opportunity for pretty much every vertical and every market to take advantage of these new technologies and create business value. I think really what it comes down to is, can the folks who have this domain expertise in their given vertical understand how to use technology and apply it to their business model? I think it's a lot more than just a technology issue. I think it's about taking technology and integrating it into the business model all the way through that organization. So I think literally every vertical can take a look at this and understand how to apply it with their domain expertise.
I think the other point is be somewhat careful about describing things as a technology disruptor, when actually they're business disruptors. I mean, people harp up and about, Lyft or Uber as technology disruptors. Really, they're an app with a database behind it, right? It's a great business idea. It's a fabulous business process, and it's absolutely disrupting the taxi industry. But the tech actually isn't that clever, right? And I know a bunch of tech guys in the room going, yeah, it's not that clever. It's really cool and disrupting. The actual taxi companies could have done it themselves. If they thought about it, they could have done it. But when you have a industry that's very self-protective, they didn't. And somebody else did it ahead of them. So again, I think when you start looking at an Airbnb, similar, right? There's all these things we call these technology disruptors, and they're not. They're business disruptions. Very, very clever use of technology, but the technology themselves isn't the disruptor.
Interesting. Gavin?
Yeah, just to add to good words from our peer panelists, I think a lot of the good discussion you had and presented as disruptors, as you may agree, they're all very much connected together, and from our perspective as well. And it also shows that you need a broader ecosystem, broader innovations and collaborations. But even when we started with 5G vision, for example, it was about a fully mobile connected and society, or increasingly so, and automated industries and socioeconomic development. So it has to provide all those enablers, a flexible network, liberated functions, edge clouds, slice, and others. Today we see that we work with connected cars, with public safety, with agriculture, with health. So I agree with some of the comments that each may have their own attributes, and there's a lot of challenges ahead as well to fill the disconnects, but there's a great opportunity for the society, empowered society and industries. Yeah.
Excellent. Moving on to question 2, and it's, with these technological advances, it's disrupting the way we're delivering our products and services to businesses and to governments. So what challenges and opportunities are brought forward to our industry with these technological advances?
If we look at the adoption of cloud in Canada with the hyperscale clouds that have come here, it's a great thing that they're attracted to Canada as a market, to be educating everyone on a cloud operational model, because the cloud's not just a place, it really is an operational model. And with Amazon, who led that charge, benefiting from, and Azure and Google now here, but benefiting from our low cost of power, we also can benefit a lot from that operational model in investing in understanding it. But there is a risk there in that a lot of them are offering unique APIs that deliver value very quickly, but some of them are proprietary. So the way we use that cloud can really limit our evolutionary path and shift a supplier demand, supplier-buyer relationship that I think is really important for Canadian organizations to be aware of as they're consuming cloud. It's not to not consume it, it's really to be informed in how you consume it that I think is important.
One of the challenges that I see if we look at like particularly networking, and I think this is relevant for both service provider and enterprise, is that, you know, the way that these modern networks work and how they're operated are much different than you know, the networks of 10 years ago. We're talking about software, we're borrowing principles from software development, and this is the way that we're going to be able to manage these networks at scale in the future. The problem is that the existing workforce and all of their experience and the education that has been available to them and that they've been using and that they're comfortable with is really not where we're going. It's kind of, it's really focused on, that legacy. And it's really tough for this workforce, for us to go and say, hey, by the way, you got to learn how to be, you got to learn about software development. You got to learn how to, automate things. And it's a big challenge, right? So I think one of the big challenges is at that people level in addressing the skill sets that are required and making sure that there are resources available to help these people transition and understand the new way that networks are going to work in the future.
Interesting. Yeah, one thing which is important on that note is that as service providers are aware of those opportunities and challenges, and it is part of the day-to-day natural change and shift. It's not about yesterday's mindset or 5 years ago. And that's a good point because there's a phased evolution here in terms of how we provide new business models, how we work with government, with enterprise, the definition of customers and customer relationship changes. But at the same time, for the entire industry and global industry, there's a lot of more work to do to understand the language, the common KPI definitions, the understanding of quality of experience, cloudification, network transformation, agility. It's an ongoing work, but it is definitely enabling and empowering flexible models. Yeah.
Our sector, which is fairly well represented in the room, has a bit of a bad rap for being really skilled on the technical side and being great at startup, but not really well suited for global domination. So one is, do you agree with this statement? And two, what can we do to improve Canada's position so that we can start taking more of our innovative small companies global?
I think JC touched on some aspects of it this morning in a very good way. I think some of the opportunities are related to really growing enterprise leaders, not just thinking about the technology, not just thinking about the business model, but how do you actually grow the talent you need to scale a business from not just the technology, but sales and marketing as well as really being a strong pillar of your overall organization. And that ensures that the overall enterprise stays in Canada and continues to grow off and throw off a stronger ecosystem of partners around the region and country.
There's an organization called Highline Beta out of Toronto that's done a lot of partnering with large enterprise, seeing that large enterprise often have problems at scale that are really important to solve, but they have, rightfully so, a culture of protecting what they have in place. And that protecting will take the legal path, the procurement path, the the way things are organized to get done is that there's just not agility in the nature of that structure, even though they have those problems at scale. I found Highline Beta's approach quite interesting, is that they'll go to these large enterprise and they will be the agile team next to the enterprise and have the SME from that organization come in and help find product market fit for something, start to scale it up outside of being burdened by the structure around it. And I imagine the Canadian telcos feel that quite a bit as having those problems at scale, as well as Canadian large enterprise and Canadian government. I think that would be a beneficial thing. On top of that, there's one, like getting the agility to move after a product market fit and test it and scale it. And then on the scale up side, there's very little capital for scale ups in the Canadian ecosystem. And that's a challenge. And then people start opening up for VCs from the US that come in, and then that VC is going to want an early exit, right as something is starting to show good product market fit, and we could scale it and create additional returns for Canada. It ends up being an exit. So I think there's a combination of how to be more agile in opportunities as well as get more funding.
Well, I guess I'll look at it from Martello's perspective. I mean, for us to scale, we went public. You've got other options. You mentioned VC. The problem with VC is they want returns, they want it now. And we're a network company. We're not going to have a hockey stick. We're going to be gradual growth as bandwidth goes up. So you can't do it that way. Or you can bootstrap. And a lot of guys are doing that as well. So, and again, finding the expertise to do that as a tech startup in Canada is kind of hard. I mean, even the TSX said, how many people are you? Well, 65. Going public? Yep. Oh, do you do anything with pot? No. We don't normally have many small tech companies go public. Oh, okay. And they literally said was, you've got like 9 years of revenues. We're used to pot companies coming with none. Right? And it was kind of, they actually had pages to go through. So again, we've got those challenges of that sort of ecosystem. But I think there's a couple of things. One is we talk about sales and that importance of it. How many universities in Canada do a course on sales? None. How many do marketing? Lots. How many do tech? Lots. What's going to kill a startup company? Not having sales, right? So you kind of got the challenge there. The other thing is, who should be our first market? Well, we're sitting in Ottawa. There's kind of a big IT presence just down the road. And I went in to see them 2 weeks ago, and I said, hey, so we do this. Frost & Sullivan just named us number SD-WAN company in the world. And they went, we've never heard of you. Cool. So, when we have that challenge of, it's really hard to get reference clients here in Canada, right? We win more outside Canada than in. That's kind of sad. And I think that's a big challenge a lot of, Canadian tech company has. We'd love to have reference clients here. And again, I will admit I'm biased. I'm on the Government Affairs Canada ICT Advisory Board, and I hear that all the time. Whereas some of my best access is through the Trade Commissioner network, and they get me companies outside of North America that say, yeah, we're looking at SD-WAN, you'd be a great fit. And they're tech conscious and price savvy, and we win. But our own local procurement agencies never heard of us, which kind of makes it hard. And I think that's the other thing, which is, getting those reference clients here in Canada is critical. Because, when you go and try and sell abroad, they're saying, well, who are your clients? Oh, everybody but Canada. Why? And you can't answer the question. I think that's part of us going through this process of growth.
It's good to make a map of how far this question goes, right, and foundational, because there's a lot of challenges and prospects, as was discussed. And then there is this vision of where we are in 5-10 years and how we can develop talents, innovations, that momentum or energy that creates innovators. And everyone is involved in that, even when we are involved in global initiatives, with everybody else around the world, and we lead the next generation networks, 5G, ONAP, everything else. We also represent Canada, right? And we also develop collaborations, develop new skills and interns. We work with universities. The kids from university graduates come and get onto those international calls for particular enablers, particular platforms, and they become the next generation. So it's good to look at the immediate, the midterm, the long term, and make a map of all these foundational creation of possibilities. Yeah.
So it's interesting because you've brought up getting those baseline contracts in Canada. We brought up VC and capital funding. I've advocated on both fronts into the government saying, you know, there's a real opportunity for us, but we need to be able to position Canada moving forward. Excuse me. A few weeks ago, I took part in a Treasury Board roundtable on regulation for connected and automated vehicles and drones. And they started out at the beginning of the session, they went, okay, how do we regulate this? And all of the associations, the Canadian vehicle manufacturers were there and everything, and we went, whoa, don't start with regulation, end with regulation. Let's start with codes of conduct, best practices, standards, and get out and see what innovations are actually happening in the industry so you don't impede innovation by regulating too early. So the government and governments writ large, both municipal, provincial, and federal, are all grappling with creating a policy environment that is both secure and safe for consumers and businesses, but is also enabling innovation. So, you know, there are some challenges here, but what do you think some of the key considerations for governments are in developing a policy environment that is going to be supportive to innovation?
I know my peer panelists are very close to companies with innovations. A few comments so that, you know, I have a chance as well. First of all, what you just said about best practices is actually, I'm not a legal expert, but it is a classic approach as one of the major pillars, because in legal terms it may be called voluntary, but there's a lot of the whole ecosystem around the world who tries to create things from design. They want to do it right. They want it to be sustainable. And a lot of us, and the government does not have to spend all that energy to get into all of that the entire industry is doing. That must be a pillar to count on. And then from there, you know, have things from design and then have end-to-end parts, look at the challenges, reward investment, and facilitate. Because when we look into all of the things you mentioned, it creates opportunities, and JC talked about opportunity, prosperity, and impact, but there's a lot of complexity as well that needs everybody, including government, to facilitate that. And we work together because we want energy efficiency as well. We want the well-being as well, or we have to want that. So it's not about a particular interest, but let's collaborate on this. And it is, a lot of times it may be conflicting interests. For example, when we talk about cybersecurity, at the same time have low cost, low battery stuff, and then have encourage investment and ecosystem. We have to optimize these.
I'm going to make a shameless plug for CENGN. You know, I think I had a big problem with this open source project Starling X that I was working on, and you know, I reached out to CENGN amongst other partners across Canada, and CENGN really stepped up to help us out. So I think the government has got to continue supporting enterprises like CENGN and others, I think. And then us as members of this community have to reach out and leverage and look for unconventional solutions. You know, I didn't really think CENGN would come through for me, but they did, and so I'm really happy about that.
I think that adoption of open source and leveraging it, allowing people who are entering into the innovation space to stand on the shoulders of giants of what's been done before and get in the mix and collaborate regardless of their size is a critical one on the innovation, supporting the innovation side. So if there's any policies that can weight any favoritism toward that, on the infrastructure side, but at the same time, you want people to be able to benefit from the upside of the IP they create. And one of the challenges we see in Canada and with governments purchasing stuff is that they will go out and demand a solution as opposed to stating their problems. And if there was an opportunity, instead of coming out and saying, here's my solution that's spec'd and heavily influenced by whoever has the deepest pockets to influence, then we're going to have a lopsided approach. But if they come out and say, I have problems, or here are the problems, can we collaborate with industry to address those problems?
I think that's a critical point, and probably come back to that. Sorry, great tech. One of the things, so for instance, you brought up cybersecurity. If you look at cyber, I mean, look at sort of what companies are challenged with. And the companies say, we're going to create regulations. And if you're a big company, that's great. You've got lots of money. You can spend money on those. If you're a small company, it'll kill you. So why not do it the other way around? Why not carrot it and say, how about tax incentives? If you can get your cybersecurity to a certain level, we will give you a tax break, right? We will create this environment, a secure environment. And I come back to that point of saying, let's look at what the business actually needs. If you over-regulate, if you, and I hate these sort of best practice things because you can hear every lawyer's wallet open up in the room. Because as soon as somebody has a breach, they're like, oh, you didn't do what's reasonable. Because that's the magic word for lawyers, right? Reasonable. Thousands of billable hours with one word. Sorry, can you tell I just went public and dealt with a lot of lawyers? Okay. But I think this is where, again, you come in and say, let's make it simpler. And I think your procurement model is the same thing. Make it simpler and attainable for business to, in this case, be secure, but give them a reason to do it. Don't, give them a stick, right? Give them the carrot, because that will drive business towards rather than force them down a path. And I think particularly when we have low margin small business here in Canada, right? You've got to give them a reason to do it.
The only thing here, a little bit different than what these guys touched about, but in terms of government, putting programs in place to enable, ICT startups or small businesses or whatever, there are a lot of programs out there that, can help you get funding and kind of pre-giving away equity for funding, and in a past life, I was, working at a startup ICT space in the early days of OpenStack, and my responsibility was to kind of go out there and grow the company. But then you also have to fund that growth. And like I said, there's all these programs out there, and they're phenomenal. But what I ended up finding is I was spending so much of my time kind of going through the processes of applying and going to all these meetings and doing all this stuff. I ended up spending like over 50% of my time on these things that weren't a sure thing and weren't actually going to get me to where I was going. So, that would be my one thing from a government perspective is to kind of understand how we can kind of streamline that process and understand how we can take out some of the inefficiencies in that process, because what you end up with is these small companies that are competing against giants that are taking a lot of their critical resources, most importantly time, in trying to get money to then grow the company. So it's a huge challenge for small companies.
Just one addition on that. I found this out the other day. It's kind of interesting. There's a company here in Ottawa. They've got 496 Canadian employees. And they can't go to over 500. Anyone know why? Yeah, they lose their funding as SME. So they're deliberately employing now on outside Canada because they'll lose their SME status and funding. Think about that. A 500-person company breaks that barrier. A 500-person company in Silicon Valley is how big? Tiny. So again, if we want to scale, we've got to adjust our policies to allow us to scale, because that one's just ridiculous.
So thanks for bringing that up. Just really quickly, show of hands in the room, lawyers. Put your hands up. Just one. I saw one hand go up.
If you want to have a swing, I'll be outside later. It's fine.
Show of hands, who is in the room from government? Excellent. I want to make it crystal clear, those three last points that were brought up are critical. We've been hearing, and I'm on the phone from morning to night with our industry, listening to problems from the SMEs all the way up to the very largest. We have a scale problem, but most of the policies and programs that we have in place are great for startups, but then trickle away once that company starts to scale and grow. And we need to find programs to support scaling and growing and bringing these companies global and having them partner with larger companies and hitting these global markets and global supply chains. So we turn the 496-person company into a 4,900-person company. And these things can happen. We just got to get the right policies and programs in place. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to give the audience a chance to ask a few questions, but I'll ask one more. Disruptive technologies often come from small businesses. They're our innovators. But the majority of income and jobs are held by multinationals. So how does organizational size play a role in the tech space? And John, you just kind of hit on it, so maybe I'll ask you to respond to this first.
I think, again, is the community, and I think it's worth giving a shout out to CENGN and others, right? We've got to support each other. We've got to have a community where we can talk and discuss. And the same thing, which is, I don't know how many of you are going to SAS North tomorrow. Something like that is fabulous. Get all these people in the room and say, how do we do these things? What are the different ways of funding? What are the different ways of technology? How are you developing? All those sort of things. I think that becomes so important for all of us to have sort of an ecosystem. And it's actually really cool being here in Kanata, right? You've got so many different companies we can go and have discussions of, would you like to partner on this? Hey, we've got a client looking for this. So I think that's critical in terms of being able to maintain some momentum in this space. And like you said, with the small ecosystem, companies, partnering is key. I think that's really, really, really important, is to find out. And again, we've got some key partners here right in this tech park, which we wouldn't have some of the opportunities we have if we didn't partner up quick.
Excellent. I would like to second that. I think the partnering is a big thing. However, I think it's different types of partnerships than the traditional, like, here's your reseller agreement, please go sell my stuff. I think and Marc actually touched on it with that Highline Beta stuff. I think it comes down to like co-creation, right? There's these big companies in Canada have needs, and there's small companies in Canada that are probably solving those needs, right? So we need to look at new ways that we can collaborate together. Fix that need for the big company, a business problem for the big company, and help the small company grow their business by doing that, right? And I think CENGN is a great example of this, where you have vendors like Juniper and others, and smaller companies like CloudOps kind of getting together and collaborating and really trying to address large problems, but kind of mixing and matching those large companies and those small companies, and ideally the net of that is positive for both sides.
I think Marc touched on a good point earlier in terms of the power of open source and the way that you can build on the shoulders of giants. We've really seen that moving from a proprietary solution and not just leveraging open source, but going to a full open source model really gives us that opportunity to collaborate very widely across not just Canadian industry, but global industry. And so you really become part of a global ecosystem. The ability to draw in talent from a wide and diverse group of contributors, I think, is incredibly powerful. And I think it is also becoming more and more of a disruptor to all of us in this room. So I'd really encourage everybody to pay attention to it. And I think every single example in your top 12, there's an open source component to it. And I think a very, very important space for us to all pay attention to.
Yeah, great points. First of all, on network transformation, as you know, a number of companies, including Bell, we have been on this network transformation path for years, and in the global open network automation platform work that they created their first version last year, we were one of the first consumers. And as you said, with liberation of functions, cloudification, softwareization, there's a lot of opportunity for a wide and broad ecosystem, and the quality speaks for itself. And again, I also want to congratulate and also be as a team member of CENGN for the significance of that. And we have also an opportunity. For example, we have provided an opportunity for LTE-M and Narrowband IoT to be tested by different players and members, and eventually they can also use it in the commercial environment. So these are all a good path and collaboration is key, as I think Geoff mentioned. Yeah, thank you.
Collaboration in the open source has allowed us to be at the table with steering committees, with AT&T, with Intel, with Juniper, and have our engineers interfacing with their engineers. And we're like a 20-person company out of Montreal. That level of being able to get access to experts at such large-scale companies and talk about their challenges really is meaningful for us as a small organization, because when we can move really quickly on solving some of those challenges and contribute it back into the open source. So for me, I'm looking at the got a networking background, so the north-south communication within companies is really a challenge. We need more east-west between the community, between the small companies, the big companies, and one of our ways of facilitating that in collaboration with CENGN too is through a lot of the meetups that we're helping contribute to in Canada around cloud-native technologies and networking. I think that's a great place to have employees from all company sizes tune in to the collaboration there.
John, in the beginning when I talked about technology disruption, but you really talked about business disruption, and it's disrupting business processes and the way we're going about business. So the next question is really like, what business trends are you guys seeing taking place? And collaboration is definitely one. And I did my MBA a few years ago. It was almost beat into us. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. So that's definitely one. But what other business trends are you guys seeing in the networking and communications market space?
Well, business models are not, static, and they change, and it almost becomes business model as a service, and this is vast, and that's where everything else you mentioned, even blockchain and this and that, also come into the picture, because it's not one thing or the other. I mean, we can imagine 5-10 years from now, we don't talk about cloud or beamforming or edge or AI, because you are expecting that. You cannot have all this and all the automation without intelligence. You want to go from reactive to proactive to predictive. So in a way, it's a part of this whole picture going forward. And business is not just the finances, it's everything from, and when I'm in strategy, I think business, and I'm in technology strategy. So we have to be flexible and agile. We have to reduce time to market. We have to reduce total cost of ownership. And we have to work with the global industry and Canadian industry and regulators and others with all these different models. We have public safety model, automotive, health, consumers.
My comment wouldn't be necessarily, what is the trend, but where is their need for change is, I think is aligning, all of the sub-organizations of these larger companies, right? When I think of like service provider and things like this, all the amount of money and time that service providers are putting into virtualizing their networks for a number of reasons, but one of them being like, let's create some modern on-demand services that are dynamic and flexible, and I can program them. Like, that promise sounds really great, but oftentimes what I see is that engineering kind of goes off in its own little pocket, and it starts to build out really cool things, and then kind of sales and marketing is just kind of waiting for it to come out on the other side, and then they'll figure out how to bring it to market. The problem is that these new services, these new great things that we're all trying to build, they need to be sold different. They need to be marketed different. There needs to be new messaging. For instance, like on-demand services. You sell on-demand services much differently than you sell a box, right? So, and this goes into the vendors too, right? Because of the way that the telecommunications companies are going, the vendors too have to kind of change how they're doing things, because our model is also moving to software. Our revenue models are changing. And as a result, we have to kind of change the way that we bring that messaging and the way that we market, right? Because you don't necessarily, when it's an on-demand service, it's not necessarily a 6-month sales cycle with 10 face-to-face meetings and a webinar and something like that. It's more about like in-your-face direct marketing, enabling people to push this button to spin up more bandwidth or whatever. So I think the whole organization kind of needs to evolve, but they need to evolve together, and they need to have kind of empathy for each other so that the whole company can evolve and not just little pieces of it.
I think there's a key piece there in information. There's so much noise at the moment. Ridiculous. People hop up and down on AI. Really? Do I think there's a twin AI in a cell phone? No, I think some couple of really advanced machine learning pieces in there. I don't think there's artificial intelligence as a true artificial intelligence. A bit like everybody's hopping on down going 5G. Well, actually, you're 4G version 6, right? Because we've got 23,000 cell towers in Canada. To go to 5G, we need 230,000. Not quite there yet. A little bit of building to be done. So this is kind of that thing of when you're talking to these businesses, allowing them to understand what the business problem you actually solve is. And I think that's a key point. When you offer something as a service, right, it's so different from a box, whether it's cybersecurity, networking as a service, it doesn't matter what it is. Because if you're selling to a business, what they care about is governance. How do I govern the service that you are offering? Because once I bought the box, I own it, right? It's a machine in the corner, the lights are green, I'm good. When you're truly offering a service, they're about governance, and that's a whole different relationship between the service provider and the client. So allowing that company to actually understand what they've bought, what it does for them, and how they govern, how it delivers a business solution is key. And I think that's a key transition, is allowing them to get through that noise that we keep sort of tech people put up as a sort of smokescreen to this stuff we do underneath, I think is key. And then allowing them to govern it once that service is in place.
Interesting.
If I may just add, I think a lot of, we have to also bear in mind that a lot of this is phased evolution. A lot of it is also path from vision to innovation to possibilities. So for example, I was always thinking with these AR, VR glasses and all that the glasses and head-mounted displays will not stay that way, dorky as was said. But North showed the innovation for that. And everything else, I mean, when we talk about machine learning and all that, it may be so-called noise today, but we also have to look at the phased evolution and look at the challenges and some of the challenges John and others mentioned. But it's important to maintain that path.
Interesting. If there's some questions from the field, now's the time. There's a couple of mics on either side. In the interim, I'll ask one last question, and maybe I'll start with you, John, for a response, because you've just gone through this. What advice would you give companies that are starting up or scaling in this particular space? They're pushing the market, they're trying to grow the business. What advice would you give? And then after John, I'll ask everybody to respond.
I think the key is really, having, and this is the non-technical, having the non-technical network. And by that I mean, having the people to go talk to, having the mentors who can guide you through certain steps. I've been lucky. I've had some very good mentors on my journey, and I think that's key. Whether they're technical mentors who can get you out of tech and up into sort of the business roadmap for that technology, but the same thing, having the right, people around you, and whether that's on finance or marketing or whatever, they all need mentors. People haven't done it before. And I'm going to use one example. We've got a fabulous CFO. She came from the Senators, so she kind of knows how to work a difficult market. Sorry. And when I said to her, hey, we'd be interested in coming to work with us. And I said, this is what we're doing this year. We're going public. And she said, I've never taken a company public before. And I said, me neither. This will be fun. And I think, but again, part of that was saying, but we know people who have. And whether it's part of the Mitel, Steve Spooner at Mitel, or other folks in this ecosystem. And I've got my sort of, I'm part of the Wesley Clover family, and Terry Matthews is my chairman of the board, so I've kind of got that ecosystem as well. I think without that, it's really, really hard. I think having mentors for the whole team across the board is key, and that's part of the ecosystem. And I think that's critical.
Jeff?
I'm going to be really boring and kind of just echo what you had said, because I've found that personal ecosystem, or even an ecosystem for your own company, to be very beneficial in my entrepreneurial endeavors in the past. For instance, Marc, every time I end up in a city where Marc happens to be, we always get together and we always kind of talk about, what's going on in the industry. And, I have other, kind of trusted advisors and people like that I like to go to. And I think that's very important to get that kind of outside perspective, especially as you're trying to grow a business. So yeah, I'll be boring and just kind of echo what you said.
Was this for startups or scale-ups?
Well, it was for both, so whichever one you kind of wanted to
So if you're in the
respond to.
startups,
Yeah.
I'd say forget about solutions and focus on problems. Try and find the problems that you can really, that's common and that you can start to solve for. And I see so many startups who are in love with their solution that they've come up with without focusing on the product market fit and getting in love with that persona that they're solving the problem for. On the scale-up side, we're still trying to figure that out. Definitely, the network is helping us understand how little we know in it and how challenging it is in Canada with organizations like the BDC and the support systems that are there, just how risk averse they are for an organization that really sees an opportunity, wants to maintain equity, and is looking to grow. But happy to network with people on that.
Interesting. Ian?
I guess a couple of perspectives. One is think about, from a network perspective, your own personal board of directors. And I think that, as a leader, is something that has really helped me in my career and growing as an enterprise leader. I think also from a scale-up perspective, there's a huge ecosystem. Leverage it. Reach out to people. People want to help you and want to see you succeed. Particularly, when you have common geographies, common backgrounds, and even the diverse backgrounds we have. So, I think there's a great opportunity here and drive that collaboration factor up. And lastly, I think it's really seeking to understand your customers' problems. I think that's something that I always try to do when in conversations. It's not about what you're trying to sell them, it's what you can do for them.
Yeah, I've personally been in R&D and strategy for about 25 or so years, and I have never seen a better environment, better chance for innovation. I know it's easier said than done, but there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of problems. Even when we look at the known vision of, for example, 5G, IoT, all of the disruptors you mentioned, cloudification, there's a lot of questions in terms of realization. Even when we talk about low latency, we have started, but when we come to that gigabit society, say in 2025, there's a lot of research, innovations, startup work, momentum of those brains and products and inventions. So I think it is good to take advantage of that when we are all up to it. On a general note, again, I will mention collaboration is important. We need each other. We cannot discriminate the big or small or medium. We need each other in this, and also government, ecosystem, research are all part of this.
Question, if you could just identify yourself and fire away.
Hi, I'm Jim.
Hi,
Does
Jim.
that help? Jim Gadban, President and CEO of Canary. I'm going to refer to a book that I read. I happen to have read it because one of the authors is on my board. The book is titled Canadian Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy, the Innovation Economy and Society Next. It's a very catchy title, right? And spoiler alert, and so there's sometimes when you give a book reference, sometimes the book sales go up. It's likely that they're not going to increase as a result of this next thing. Basically, the book says no matter what the government has tried for the last 100 years, nothing gets better. It doesn't get better with policy. The book says this, but I've also talked to assistant deputy ministers in my role. I have the privilege of dealing directly with the federal government, and they will tell you that no matter what they've tried to increase productivity, they've done consultations, and they've done everything the consultations have said, and it hasn't actually increased productivity. If one accepts the notion that policy is there to drive a common good, and so during the discussion on the panel, you talked about suggestions for policy changes, and I will tell you the government will be challenged with making micro policy changes because there's always a competing perspective on any policy change. My question is, we've created this entity called CENGN that has a mission of actually advancing ICT in Canada, next-gen networks, and we also have other entities called Encore that do similar things, but they represent a sort of a common purpose that the private sector can rally around and actually do something with. And if one considers that CENGN is actually an artifact of policy, so it's a policy that says we want to advance next generation networks, we're going to create a standalone agile entity to actually drive this. Canary has a very similar mandate in that regard. From the panelist perspective, what do we need to do to make entities like CENGN as successful as possible in terms of realizing the vision that the policy creators have actually stepped up and said we want an entity to actually drive next-gen networks? But that's not going to happen unless everybody sees that as a common purpose, as a common goal, common purpose. So what are the additional things CENGN could and should do to get to this? Because if we sit around and wait for yet another government policy that's going to solve it, this book will tell you that is likely not going to help the situation.
Well, I can start with a few words, and thanks for that question. I think it's a great question in the sense that a lot of times we think about, so where do we come with a common language? What do we mean by facilitating? What do we mean for the government, not just, for example, any government in the world, control or block or discriminate, but to maintain the policy they would like to have to represent all and to facilitate. A lot of times, as some body like CENGN may be in a perfect position to provide that platform, because otherwise, what do I mean by let's have a dialogue? I mean, we can go to government respects us, and they talk to everybody. But here, there may be a systematic platform which is open and democratic, and they can develop that understanding that what we mean by complexity, what we mean by inclusion, what we mean by rewarding, and it's a step forward. I don't want to necessarily answer that in 5 years we will not have the same level of so-called pessimism, but it's a step forward because we have to move forward together.
I think I've heard it a couple of times. I think there's an opportunity for a sales and marketing course. I think that would be a great offer beyond just the technical. So, I'm a technology guy, but what I really see is a gap in the overall ecosystem is more and more business people to drive the growth of the overall ecosystem. The other thing I would say is reach out to CENGN, leverage them, drive that virtuous circle of continuous feedback, leverage them, they help you pull in your partners. It's a great forum to drive collaboration.
CENGN's got a lot of focus on helping startups as part of the mission and providing an environment to facilitate organizations coming in. And then we also have a lot of larger member organizations that are contributing significantly, like Bell and TELUS, and on the vendor side too, Juniper. And I think that's really, really valuable. When I look at if CENGN was kind of like a proxy for what Nortel was in the past for us as Canadians that are creating IP and trying to monetize in the world, that would be, for me, a mission statement or more activity in that space that could help people scale up. Because I think Canada's got a great position globally in the networking space. We have a lot of Canadian leaders that are around the world in telecom. And there's a good brand around Canada, but there's not a very large Canadian organization helping with the monetization of Canadian services and software. So I don't know what the solution is, but I know what the problem is a bit from an organization that has IP and is looking at a scale and would like to contribute on that.
We've got one last question, and then we'll have to, okay, we'll go through these very quickly, and I'll ask you to be brief.
My question was touched upon by a couple of panelists, but I'd like to ask again, what more can the colleges and universities do to prepare the next generation, both with technical and non-technical skills for the new world, I guess?
So, if you guys don't mind, I'll answer this one because recently I've had some conversations with universities and colleges, and they're having a hard time developing curriculum that keeps pace with the changes in technology. And it's very difficult for them. So what I would suggest to our colleges and universities, much in the same way we've had a conversation around collaboration, is we need to develop platform where industry, our large industry players, as well as our most innovative startups, are going to the universities and say, these are where our gaps are. This is what types of training we will need in 3, 4, 5 years, and continually evolve what's going on in terms of curriculum at the colleges and universities so that we're pumping out graduates that can be plug and play into the industry, as opposed to it's just we're pumping out a computer science or a computer engineering. Yeah, they've got all the good baseline stuff, but they don't have the cutting edge, and it takes industry a little bit of time to get these people up to pace so that they can start contributing. So it's really about partnership. I think we need to have some kind of a platform where our academic institutions are better partnering with the technology industry. We've seen the ICT data, right? ICT data saying 220,000 vacancies. We've been working, ITAC's been working with a number of universities. We've got a business and technology management program. We're working on cyber curriculum. We're working on AI curriculum. But I think we need to be able, as a nation, to foster those collaborations between industry and our academic institutions.
Yeah, if I may add quickly. First of all, that's a great question. We keep it open and we grow on that. But just on your note, a lot of industries, including ourselves, are doing that on the same path. We not only bring students from undergrad, from grad, from PhD, but also go to them. We talk to the faculties. We represent them for NSERC and other things. And we also suggest theses. So these are important because a lot of problems, and that's also our intersection between CENGN, ourselves, startups, and universities. Like what was those PhD theses? Like a light protocol which is secure. Everybody needs that. So we are on that path, and I'm also personally involved, but it's a great question we should all do more of and find better answers. Perhaps CENGN can help as well for the entire industry to follow and to lead.
Thanks. John, and then we'll get to the last question.
A good example was we had a sort of get together, I think it was about almost 4 years ago now, and it was about cybersecurity. And we said there's not enough cybersecurity talent coming through. And we were sitting there, all these people, and academia was there, and industry was there, and government was there, and we all said, you know what we'd really like is an apprenticeship program. Right? The UK has one for cybersecurity. Well, let's do something like that. We've got a country that's kind of similar, kind of same academic programs. Let's do an apprenticeship program. And what we said was, we'll run it, just we need some sort of government contract to operate under. 4 years ago. Crickets. And I think this is the challenge of, some of these things are saying, if you let industry and academia just get on with it, they will. They'll sort themselves out because, there's one side wants talent, one side wants to generate talent because that's how they make their money. Go together. But you need the framework for them to operate under it. Go back to your point, I think you said about some national construct. If you have some simple national construct, doesn't need to be heavy, doesn't need to be massive policy, just some national construct we can generate these sort of co-op apprenticeship programs under, and it's governed, it'll happen because both sides want to do it. And it just needs to come together. And I think those are the pieces where the government can play a role of saying, we'll put you in the room, make it happen. It'll work.
Thanks, John. Last question.
Yes, hi. My name's Carolyn, and I came here out of curiosity with the question that I had was, what do I do as somebody who's older, who needs to have a deep dive into a continuing education program that would put me so up to speed on tech so that I could be a board member and I could rock the story of data and help ask the appropriate questions. I notice Google is helping because if you ask a question in Google, they kind of tell you now, it seems to be like you seem to be directed. Coming here, for example, it's time to start going to industry and seeing what they're talking about and the meetups for startups and learn the language. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to mention is the need for some direction. In addition to sort of the massive open online courses that say, just take what we have here, it's cheap, it's quick, you can do it on part-time, but we don't get the mentors, and we don't get the co-ops, and those kinds of things. And a lot of women are looking for part-time initiation so that they can continue maybe addressing the needs at home or they're in their workplace, but also getting up to speed. I was at a Women in Data conference this week, and it was hosted by Global Affairs Canada. I just went. I have no connection with the organizations because I was listening to what the internet was telling me to do. And what I found out there is I took some notes, and one of them I thought I'd share with you and maybe have you respond. The problem with statistical data now, or the problem with data today, is that you have statistical data coming out of organizations and governance. Some of those places in the world, because this conference was different speakers of different places in the world, they would not have women as part of that data. They simply wouldn't be counted, or not significantly. Only the women of childbearing age and whatnot. But we're only talking about sort of being counted in terms of these are potentially the population who have needs perhaps unmet. Perhaps they could be your clients in business and whatnot. But the other interesting point I had was that open data is 95% male generated. And so there is bias as to who makes the data. We need to have trust, quality, interpretation of the data. So who does this is the biggest question of today. Could we have your response? Thank you.
I guess in the first part of your question, Marc mentioned meetups. I think that's a great place. There's a mailing list you can get onto. There's an unbelievably diverse set of meetups on technology, but also other topics as well. So I think that's a great way to get plugged into what's going on, get up to speed on the lingo. The other thing is open source technologies. If you're a technology person, you can get plugged into that. These communities are very, very welcoming. They're looking for people to bring their contributions forward. They're very diverse, and I think that's a great opportunity in terms of getting plugged into things. And then there's great work going on around open data as well. I'm not too familiar with that, but those are the comments I would have.
I'd add to that with a particular organization that's across Canada that I just found out about and I'm tuning into. It's called Data for Good. I think there's quite a few people in Toronto that are part of it, and it's an organization focused on big data for nonprofits. And they've got some interesting case studies, and they're very community focused. That if you've got passion around that, and for the latter part of your question, I think that's a really complex conversation that we don't have time for, but is really important one to talk about.
I'll come up with a quick solution. Are you from around Ottawa? Yeah. Okay, so how many guys in the room or people in the room go to Tech Tuesday?
Sorry?
Tech Tuesday here in Canary. Go to Tech Tuesday, buy anybody in this room a drink. You'll get 2 hours of tech download straight there. But Tech Tuesday here is fabulous. Get on the mailing list. It's a really good get-together.